Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook. Today, we're Monday, June the 3rd. I am Marc-Antoine Godin, and alongside with me, Arpin Basu. Arpin, how was your weekend?
It's good. It's a good weekend. Yeah. Nice weather. Weather's getting nice. Got to watch some hockey. But when the weather's getting nice, it means we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the offseason. When the weather starts to get nice is when things start to happen. And the long wait for the non-playoff teams is coming to an end. The Stanley Cup final is on our doorstep. But before we get to that, so we're going to talk a little bit about what this month is going to look like for the Canadiens and for the whole league. But before that, we actually had some news on the Canadiens front last week that we wanted to just talk about briefly. JF Houle getting a 3-year extension with the Canadiens to coach the Laval Rocket. Continue coaching the Laval Rocket. Was expected. I think there was some fans who were kind of questioning whether, the Rocket missing the playoffs this season or even last season and not necessarily getting the results that you would expect if he should be back. But I think this reaffirms the Canadiens' acknowledgement that A, winning in the AHL with a young team is difficult. B, Jean-François Houle is graduating players out of Laval that are fitting relatively seamlessly onto the NHL club, and that is his primary job. And so extending him confirms that is his primary job, and that, yes, winning would be nice, but the fact not only players come out of Laval and fit right into Montreal, but players that Montreal sends back to Laval come back better and improved in the ways that Montreal wanted them to improve. So all in all, I thought a sensible signing that just shows the extent to which JF Houle fits into the grand scheme of what the Canadiens are trying to do, because he's going to have a lot of prospects coming into Laval over those 3 years.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned about the fact that the prospects that arrive in Montreal are well prepared, this is something that Martin Saint-Louis mentioned on more than one occasion, and that's probably the biggest endorsement that Jean-François Houle could get from the Canadiens brass, and probably the idea, that's the part that made it, I think, expected that he would get another deal. Maybe it took a bit longer than previously thought, but JF Houle mentioned that during all this time, even though it lasted for more than 5 weeks, that hiatus between the end of the season and him signing his new contract, he spent a lot of time going through the lineup, going through the organization with the Rocket GM, John Sedgwick. So all in all, I think it's good. It shows that right now, with Martin Saint-Louis being firmly at the helm in Montreal, there is probably not that big of a priority that's put on developing the next Canadiens head coach in Laval, and really making a focus on who's the best guy to develop the guys that we have. And that's true that the Canadiens brass would like the Rocket to perform better and make the playoffs and give that experience to their young players. But I think it's probably more on their group of veterans, their veteran forwards especially, I think, where that team came up short a little bit. So there's going to be a bit of a roster shakeup. There's always one every year in the AHL coming summertime. But I think that they're going to look at building a better supporting cast and better veterans around the young talent that they already have, but now that's going to be bolstered with the arrival of Owen Beck, of Philip Michard, of Adam Engstrom. There's a few guys like that are going to join the group. It's still going to be a young team, but I feel like we hear that every year. Oh, the Rocket, we're going to be young. We're going to be. I mean, it has become a staple of of the identity of an American League team. Most of them are young teams, and you constantly, especially for a team that has a lot of draft picks, you graduate a lot of guys, you make a lot of choices, and you make you try to promote as many picks as you can. So the situation the Canadiens are in, they have some tough choices to make once in a while. Like they decided to cut ties with a prospect like Cédric Guindon, for example.
Mm-hmm.
They gave a 2 year entry level deal to Jared Davidson, a favorite of JFO. But all in all, I think it's become normal that this team is going to be young. It's not. We're far from the Chicago Wolves there or the old Hershey Bears that used to be a lot more seasoned team in the AHL.
Yeah, and you look at the AHL playoffs as they're going on now. I spoke to the coach of the Milwaukee Admirals, Carl Taylor, who has a similarly young team. The difference being that a lot of his youth is at forward and not on defense, like it will be with the Rocket. But and he pointed out which I thought was interesting, and I think should be. Sorry not to repeat myself for anyone who read my story on Friday, but it's um, choosing AHL veterans who have accomplished things either in
Yeah,
the AHL or at the NHL level, and he pointed out 4 players: Cal O'Reilly, who's played nearly 1,000 games in the AHL. Roland McEwen is a guy on defense. He's 27. He's won a Calder Cup before. You have Kevin Gravel, also on defense, 31. You might think by Gravel that he's Quebecois, but he's not. He's from Michigan, but he also won a Calder Cup elsewhere. And Troy Grosnick, who is who's the goalie, that's sort of the tandem goalie with Yaroslav Askarov, another young piece of that team. Is a veteran guy, is from Wisconsin, has the market, very similar to how Laval talks about adding guys from Quebec as those in those veteran roles. He's sort of that local guy who really appreciates the market and tries to, maintain those ties with the market. So
yeah,
you look at the veterans the Canadiens brought in strictly as free agents last year, and not counting guys who were on AHL deals or what have you, but the guys they went out and got when the summer began were Elias Anderson, Philippe Maillet, and Brady Keeper. And while they were all good AHL players or potentially good AHL players in the case of Maillet, you look at their past history and they don't have that history of success. They don't have that. And so I kind of took that. I thought that was an interesting point because you look at their team and it's young. I mean,
yeah.
Joakim Kemmel, Igor Afanasayev, I don't know how to say that. I'm sorry if I butchered that. Zach Leroux. They have Juuso Parssinen, who's a 7th-round pick, but still, is very young. And you look at their playoff scoring, and they're all young guys. They have Reed Schaefer on the team. So this is something I think the Laval Rocket really need to look at.
That's a good group of forward prospects.
Oh, absolutely. Excellent group of forward prospects. You have what, 3? You have 3 first-rounders in there and a second-rounder. So it's really I think this is something that the Canadiens need to dive deep on, and Jeff will, on the last day of the Rocket season, really made kind of I wouldn't say an impassioned plea or anything, but really quite lucidly stated the reality that they need the right veterans to guide these young players, and sort of tacitly saying that they didn't have that. Not without saying so, was kind of saying, like, we need to make sure we have the right veterans who are ready to accept the role of being a mentor. I think Brandon Gignac accepts that role to some extent. Toby Bisson on defense, who was first partnered with Logan Mailloux, then partnered with David Reinbacher, embraced that role, but would be looking for something more than an AHL contract. But he's the type of guy that but the past success and all that, I think that's something that they need to look at, and they need to create the infrastructure for their young players to come into a structure with these guys that can shepherd them to some success. And the guys they added last year didn't do that. And that's not on JFO. That's on management. And I think they got to do a better job this offseason of finding the right guys to come to Laval. Because honestly, across the AHL, is there a better place to play aside from the weather? Is there a better place to play than Laval with the facility they have, with just the NHL style environment that they've created in Laval, and the crowds that they play in front of? Uh, any AHL free agent should look at that as a great opportunity to play in a really great environment in a really professional organization where you're not playing in front of a few hundred people every night.
Yeah, and just to finish off this topic, there's also the fact that yes, you want to surround you surround your young talent with proven veterans, guys who can shepherd them, guys who have won. I agree with all that, but it's also the fact that generally in the AHL you win with your veterans. They're the ones that ultimately can help you win games, and they went AWOL, those guys, down the stretch. The last few games that the Rocket needed to win. I mean, the Mayes of this world, Mitchell Stephens, those guys are the ones that should really get you over the hump. And I didn't feel like they had enough impact. And so it's not necessarily the most talented guys or the guys with the highest ceilings that are going to help you win at the AHL level, because they're still young, they're still developing. So they need guys that have seen it and who can provide you with that, who can deliver a win when it's time. So that's another aspect. Simply, have them have an impact at the right time. I thought this is something that was lacking at the end of the season, and it's not something that I'm going to put on JFO. So
no, but I think the point you made about, because just one last thing, but it's important to note.
Yeah.
I don't know where the Canadiens stand on JF Houle's potential as an NHL coach. I know that he has NHL aspirations for sure. Why wouldn't he? And it's perfectly normal. But he seems in that video conference after he signed, he seems kind of resigned to the fact that if he's going to reach the NHL, it's not going to be in the organization he's in right now. And so his term being perfectly aligned with Marty St. Louis' term, they both have 3 years left on their respective contracts. Is interesting to me. It kind of creates a little synchronicity between those two roles, and who knows what's going to happen 3 years from now. But, I think the Canadiens hope to accomplish a lot in that span. And so it's good to have this structure in place with an end point of sorts that's not too far in the distance, where they can kind of adjust or recalibrate how this works, if in fact this doesn't work. But it's interesting to me that the terms on their two contracts align perfectly.
All right, moving on. Before we get to the Canadian summer, we were talking off the air before we started recording. The fact that the two teams that are reaching the Stanley Cup Finals, the Edmonton Oilers, obviously, and the Florida Panthers, had a former agent at the top of their management. So obviously, in Edmonton, Ken Holland is the GM, but Jeff Jackson is above him in the hierarchy, and he's a former agent. And we all know Bill Zito in Florida, who seems to have become a perennial GM of the year candidate.
Deservedly.
Deserve it. Oh man, he's so good at his job.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So those two guys, former agents, what do you make of this? And because there's a third guy who's a former agent and who's a GM in this league, and it's right here in Montreal.
Yeah, it's Ken Hughes. And so you don't want to extract too much meaning out of it. And honestly, Jeff Jackson arrived so recently in Edmonton that, the extent of his impact there is questionable. But Bill Zito, this is Bill Zito's team 100%. And you kind of to me, the one thing that I take from it, and it might be false, I don't know, but I feel like Bill Zito has perfectly cultivated the Panthers window. They have a bunch of UFAs this year. he has some things that he needs to do, but this is kind of how you operate in the cap world, is that it's almost become like junior hockey in a sense where you have to go through cycles and you need to make sure that you're peaking at the right financial cycle. In this case, in junior hockey, it's different. It's guys graduated, whatever, but you go through these mini rebuilds or full on tear down rebuilds in junior hockey, which I don't think is the case in the NHL, but you do need to create situations where you have an efficient use of money that all comes to a head in one season. And that's the season where you can really go for it, or maybe two seasons, but like the windows are tighter now, right? Because I mean, just look at the Stars. The Stars have a whole bunch of balls in the air right now. Like Wyatt Johnson's going to need a new contract soon. Like all these young guys, Thomas Harley's going to need a new contract soon. Like they have like, it's so hard to juggle when you're coming, especially if you draft well, and the next contract coming off of entry level is so big. And so you look at this and I see the Canadiens in a position where they're already starting to think about this. We've already talked about Jaroslav Koski's contract, which is coming up this summer. Caden Gouli's contract could be extended this summer. And they have a lot of these financial windows that they're trying to manage all at the same time. And I look at the Florida Panthers ledger, their cap friendly page, and it seems like there's going to be a lot of turnover, but I think he's created an environment that people want to be in. Matthew Tkachuk basically orchestrated his trade to them because he wanted to play there so badly. But he's managed to build a team where you're going to get a Carter Verhaeghe at less than $5 million. You have all these pieces that are coming up on the end of their contract, but are providing excellent value right now. Sam Reinhart being exhibit A of that. So I don't know how much meaning we can extract from that for the Canadiens and for Ken Hughes, but it seems to me that being an agent gives you a different perspective on that process of putting the financial pieces of a team together that maybe traditional former players or what have you might not have.
Well, it's definitely not a trend when you look at the number of agents that have gone to the other side and become executives. I mean, it's happening, and it's noteworthy not only because of Zito, because of Kent Hughes, but also to a certain extent, you could add the name of Émilie Castonguay, also who's an assistant GM in Vancouver. But the proportion since the beginning of the 21st century has remained pretty much the same. Where there is a trend is that if you look 20, 25 years ago, there were a lot of GMs that had a significant past behind the bench. And we hardly see that anymore. Barry Trotz has graduated from being a former coach to a GM in Nashville. He's the exception. Now it used to be, with Bob Gainey, with Rick Dudley, with McLean in Columbus, bunch of guys who had coaching experience and then moved up and became general managers. So now Trotz is more of an exception. So I don't know to which extent as an agent I would tie it directly to the salary cap. I think if you surround yourself well with someone who understands the numbers and is a strategist also from a numerical standpoint, from a quantitative standpoint, I think it's useful. But I think I had a chat once with Bill Zito, and he said, the advantage that we have as agents is that we have a 360 view of the inner workings of the NHL. So that's really where an agent such as Kent Hughes, former agent, he understands, he knows, how Team X develops his players. The agent understands the different programs around the league, how they treat their players, how are the services. So you can, or even, what's the level of communication between the NHL level and the AHL level. So the agent can take a lot of ideas that he has seen from having a peek into 30, let's say 32 windows in the NHL of the different teams and apply it in the whole thing that in the own thing that he's going to develop. So I think that
Mhm.
this surround view of how to run a team is really successful. Is really useful from an agent perspective, because you have other guys that have a more limited perspective on the game, albeit whether you're a former scout, maybe you were brought up through management, or you're a former player. Those are different
Mhm.
lanes. The agent gives you a bit of everything. And the last thing I'll say on that is that Bill Zito said that the one thing that helped him the most from going from an agent to a GM, and maybe that Ken could speak to the same effect, is that it's the legal training, and it's
Mhm.
not only agents that have legal training. You look at Julien Brisebois; he's never been an agent, but he's definitely got legal training, and a few other guys around the league have one too. And Zito
Most every
told me,
team
he
has
said,
someone with a legal background.
for
Every
sure,
every
for
team in the
sure.
league, yeah.
But the thing is, the point that Zito made is that it's when it comes to decision time as the decision maker. He said in law school you're taught to find the best answer. So if the example he gave me, he said if you're building a wall, typically people would be building a wall. Someone would say, "Well, we need some concrete to patch this hole here," and the guy would go to Home Depot, get some concrete, come back and say, "Yeah, okay, that works." He said in law school they'll teach you to say, uh, "Is that the best concrete here?" So he said, a lot of times I will ask my people, is this the best way to do things? I know it
Mhm.
works, but is there a better way to do it? So finding a little bit like Martin St. Louis talks to his players and say, what is the best play? It's not necessarily just a good play, but what is the best play? Well, a manager that has illegal training has developed the mentality of not finding a good solution, but finding the best solution and the best answer. So it can be very annoying sometimes because you're constantly pushing your people, and they'll
Mhm.
find, say, man, well, we thought we found a solution on that. Yeah, but is this the best? It can be annoying, but ultimately you're going to squeeze the best out of everybody on your team, on your management team. So that's something that he said his legal training as that's really the characteristic that has defined his leadership with the Florida Panthers. So, and I wouldn't be surprised that Kent thinks along the same way in Montreal.
Well, he's said that in the past, and he's talked about, one thing about Kent Hughes is he's aware of how the league works, and he's not convinced that
Yeah,
everything the league does is the best way to do things. And he's not going to follow, we always talk about a copycat league. Like, I don't think Canadiens fans should expect the Canadiens to be copycatting anyone. Like they feel pretty confident about their own ability to chart their own path and find the best
yeah,
processes. And Kent has spoken publicly about that many times, how, we're going to do what we feel is right. We're not going to do something just because that year's cup winner did it that way. So, um, but yeah, he has a very similar view to what you just described with Bill Zito, which is great insight. And so anyhow, it was just a funny, quirky observation I had last night after Edmonton, got outshot 3-1 and still managed to win Game 6 and make the Stanley Cup final. Because their generational player made it so. Basically, I mean, there was a lot more. That's oversimplifying the game. But we had mentioned in a previous episode how Canadiens fans should be rooting for the Stars because they have a more replicable team building strategy. And in the end, the high end offensive talent won out. I don't think that means the
yeah,
Stars. I don't think that means you shouldn't build teams the way the Stars did. I think that's an actual. It's just because it didn't work doesn't mean that the actual formula doesn't work. But ultimately, I think we mentioned this will be like a
there's
referendum on how to build teams, and the superstar talent won out over the well balanced, well built, well drafted team
yeah.
that the Stars were.
I'll still argue that they had the toughest path to the NHL to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Well, they're in the toughest
Dallas, I
division.
mean,
And they're in the toughest. Whoever
yeah,
was coming
and
out of
they,
that
I mean,
division was going to have the toughest path.
that's it.
Yeah.
So I mean, they had they beat two tough opponents, and they scored enough goals to do so. They just came up short against Edmonton, but I think that was impressive. That performance from Edmonton. Yes, they've got that firepower, but I feel as though they've learned a lesson on how to buckle down and play tighter
And
when needed.
and
So
their depth is
they
excellent.
just don't. Yeah, I mean, you look at the way that
Yeah.
Chris Knobloch has moved guys in and out of the lineup and having fresh guys out there and keeping the accountability high throughout the playoffs. And it seemed as though he had his finger on the pulse and nobody complained. Everybody continues to go along and no, everything's working for Edmonton right now. Okay, Arpin, we are June the 3rd. Okay.
Yeah.
And a month from now exactly, we're going to be July the 3rd. So, which means that we're going to be on the third day of free agency. So we can say today is the first day of the combine. People are saying, wait a minute, how come you have you're at home still?
Yeah.
Well, we both are going to be leaving for the combine in the wee hours of the morning tomorrow. So we're going to spend the rest of the week at the combine. But today is the first day of the combine. And we can say that the month ahead to the day is probably the biggest month that off the ice the Canadiens will have since the new management team has arrived. Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton acknowledged the fact that it was their most important summer yet. They suspect that next summer of 2025 will be even more important. I think there might be more action on the free agency front next summer compared to this one. But the next month, starting today, the next 30 days are going to be pretty key for A, what the Canadiens are going to look like next season, and B, how they can make the necessary steps to further their progression and their rebuild. So it starts this week with the combine in Buffalo. It's something that we unfortunately have been very we've covered that event way too much because usually we should be it's much better to cover a team that goes deep in the playoffs
Yes.
than end up going doing hotel lobby work in Buffalo.
Right.
But
in a hotel that doesn't have a lobby. We do hotel lobby work in a hotel with no lobby. That's really. But those very nice people at Panorama on 7 who treat us so well and are so patient with us every year. We love you guys. We'll be there soon. We'll be there on Tuesday. But anyhow.
Yeah, absolutely. With that waiter who looks like Freddie Mercury. So
I hope he's still there. And I hope he sees this podcast.
Yeah, I get it. So it starts with the combine. What do you expect to see or the conclusions that you hope to get from the upcoming week in Buffalo? We know that the Canadiens like to interview a ton of prospects. It always hovers around 70 to 75, which is not too dissimilar from the length of an NHL list when it comes to prospects. But still, I mean, there are guys that are like European prospects that are not going to be at the combine. Some Russian prospects are not going to be at the combine, and guys obviously that are either at their second or even third year of eligibility to the draft are not going to be at the combine. But still, they're going to interview a lot of kids there. What do you expect comes out of that time of the year?
Well, I was told that their list is actually going to be closer to 100 names, which is insane. But that's the bulk of the work at the combine is those 100 odd interviews that the Canadiens are going to are gonna do. And they are notoriously thorough in interviewing kids that they will have no chance of drafting. For example, they scheduled an interview with Connor Bedard last year. Um,
Yeah.
One of a handful of teams to do so. Most teams didn't waste their time with that, and I think it was kind of a funny story that got relayed to us that the Canadiens thought that they'd canceled it, but they hadn't. That word hadn't gotten to Connor yet, so they weren't really ready. And all of a sudden, he showed up for his interview, and they weren't. They had to kind of scramble and do an interview, kind of wing it. But that shows the extent to which they're thorough. They see this as an opportunity to get to know these kids, whether they draft them in June at the end of June, or they are in trade talks for them 2 or 3 years from now, or 5 years from now. This is an ability to gather information on a group of kids who are entering the league to add to their database of information on players in the league, whether they play for the Canadiens or whether they don't. So they take advantage of that. They take full advantage of that. I think an argument could be made that maybe they should zero in on the guys that they plan on drafting. They don't view it that way because I think they cast a wide net in terms of who they might draft, and I think a lot of the information they get from the interview can influence who they draft quite strongly, far more so than the physical testing that happens over the weekend at the combine. So what am I expecting? We had a question on X for the mailbag from the Gargoyle, who was asking how we go about gathering information at the combine and how we manage to kind of see how the winds are blowing, and that's kind of the secret sauce. Like there's a lot of people around. You talk to a lot of people. There's agents around. Obviously, you're talking to the prospects. There's GMs around that are just in casual conversation. You can glean some information. And so that by the end of the week, you have enough of those conversations, you can form some sort of idea as to where the team you cover is leaning. Now, I will say one thing. I really think that process is going to be more difficult this year. I think there's a lot of, last year when we went to the combine, it was pretty easy because it was not easy, but you knew who the first 4 picks were going to be, and the Canadiens were picking 5th. So it was not that difficult to say, okay, well, after Bedard and Fantilli and Carlson and Smith are gone, who's the best of the rest? And you could zero in on that. Well, now that's out the window. Like where the Canadiens were, the draft started at Montreal at 5, the draft starts at Chicago at 2 this year. And so, and depending on what happens at 2, 3, and 4, there's all sorts of scenarios the Canadiens have to map out in depending on what happens. And that's something they're doing, and that's something they're going to continue to do at the combine, where not only do they get to talk to the prospects, but there's information floating around, and there's ways for them to kind of start to try to figure out which team is in on who and who's talking to who and who's more interested in who. And there's a lot of rumors and a lot of false rumors, frankly. Like a lot of people are trying to throw you in the wrong direction. So you have to know to take everything with a grain of salt, or at least understand that there's sometimes an agenda behind someone sharing a piece of information with a journalist in our case, but in their case, through teams, or why do we know this? And so it's really, as far as that's concerned, it's really the kind of the highlight event of the year. Like the draft is up there too, but it's the one place where all the decision makers, the agents, GMs, scouts, they're all in the same place. And there's a lot of stuff floating around, and you got to be able to sift through all of that and get what's real. And I think in Montreal's case this year, I think that's going to be tougher than in previous years.
Yeah, it's a very gossipy event, so that's fun.
Big time.
There's also instances sometimes where team staffers will come to reporters and ask the reporters some questions about the team that they cover, because they also are looking for information. So just understand this, and this is a phenomenon that starts at the combine, but and you get to the you get to the draft, for example, and the day before the draft, 2 days before the draft, you'll have a scout saying, "Oh, what are you hearing?"
Yeah.
The scouts will come to the reporters. What are you hearing? It's because they want to have an understanding of what the other teams are thinking, because it's a big poker game. So yeah, for sure, teams are very also methodical in disclosing certain information and not disclosing other information. But that's where you try to use your contacts to the best of your ability and your network to gather that info. That's what we're going to do. Me, on my end, one thing that I think is going to be a key for Montreal is trying to get some more a clearer answer on the health of Caden Lindstrom.
Yeah.
Because I think that the back issue for an 18-year-old kid is a cause of concern. Maybe it's been overblown, that it's already in the past, and maybe that Caden is going to show up, on the floor on Saturday morning for the fitness tests and blow away the competition. That's possible. If he does, I think that it's going to have a significant impact on the impression or the reassurance level that he's going to give the teams. I don't know if we have. I don't know to which extent this health concern it would cause him to go down the lists a great deal, but I think that at least the team that chooses to draft a player because of his upsides and his qualities could be reassured and feel as though it's not as big of a, not, I wouldn't say a long shot, but it's not as big a risk as you would think, because you don't want to end up with a guy who at 30 years old is going to be forced to retire because of back pains or whatever,
Yeah.
So
his agent has let it be known. Well, his agent has let it be known that every team's going to get a full medical report on Lindstrom at the combine. So it's they're trying to get in front of it. I think they see the concern. I don't know how much. Yeah, I don't know how much real concern. Obviously, it's concerning when it's back, when you're that size, you play the way Caden Lindstrom does, and it really derailed his draft year. But I get the impression that there are teams that look at it more as a one-off, not necessarily a chronic issue, but that remains to be seen. And obviously, the teams are going to have to take that medical report with a certain grain of salt too, because if it was a bad medical report, I don't think they would be disseminating it all across the league. I don't think they'd be sending it out to every team in the league, but it sounds like it's going to be reassuring to some extent, but each individual team is definitely going to have to do their own independent evaluation of the whatever information they present. So that is definitely one of the big questions. The other one is Beckett Sennecke is not going to be doing testing this year. He got hurt late in the playoffs. So he's not going to be able to do the physical testing. He'll be there to talk to teams, obviously, but he's not healthy enough to do any of the physical testing. And so that's, it's unfortunate for him. And I think it's unfortunate. I think the teams would have liked to have seen that from him. But he will be there at least to talk to the teams, which is the more important, as I mentioned earlier, the more important part of the event is that.
I'm going to keep an eye on Sennecke. I feel like obviously the Demidov is the dream scenario, but I wouldn't be ready right now to say that the odds for the Canadiens of drafting, let's say, Iginla are higher than them drafting Sennecke. There's a lot to like in this player. Yeah,
there's a lot to like in this player. And we've talked about it already, but small man skills and a big man body is something that this organization and the scouting group like. So his late growth spurt, the fact that he kind of perfected a lot of the skills that he has as a smaller player, then grew into this guy who has a lot of frame to grow into. Like, he still needs to get a lot stronger. But there's a lot of potential to add there. Which I think is how teams feel about Demidov as well. There's a lot of consternation about his actual height. He's listed at 5'11". SCA's website lists him at 5'9". I've heard some people think that he's closer to 6 foot, if not 6'1". So when he goes,
Yeah,
Dan Milstein's having a camp in Florida later this month with all of his Russian clients.
that's his
That's to give
agent.
teams.
That yeah,
That's his
that's his
agent.
agent.
Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, Dan Milstein of Gold Star Agency is having a camp in Florida for all his clients from Russia who aren't able to come to the combine. Demidov will be one of them. He won't be doing any of the testing or skating or anything else that's because he's injured, but he will be measured, I would imagine, in front of people. So I think a lot of people are going to be very curious to see that measurement and see what he actually comes in at because I'm presuming he'll be measured because it's not clear. The 5'11" figure with him is not. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of confidence in that number, and I think there's people that I've spoken to who feel it's higher than that, which is interesting.
Higher than 5'11". Well,
Yeah,
if
I
that
think
that
I've
that would
heard
be
I've
good.
heard it's north of 6 foot. It's probably closer to six
Okay,
foot and a half, something like that. So
right.
we'll
Okay.
see.
So
But yeah,
yeah,
again,
speaking
that's
of Dan Milstein, I mean everybody thinks that Milstein has only Russian clients, and he does have Demidov and also Yegor Surin, but
yeah.
and he's got Artyom Levshanov, who's from Michigan State, but he's also the agent for Zane Parekh in Saginaw. So
Mm-hmm. There you go.
anyway, um,
But they won't
so
be at
yeah,
that camp.
so this no, well, I don't know about Levshanov. I know that Demidov. No, and Parekh, no,
Levshanov's
for
going to be
sure
at the
no.
combine.
But
No, no, they'll be at those two will be
that's
at the
it,
combine. It's a camp for people who can't go to the combine because of various reasons. So
right? Yeah.
yeah,
So Demidov is remains the price target here, but I think it remains very unlikely. I find that he would fall to number 5. I have a hard time, you know,
I don't know about I don't know. I don't
imagining
know,
that this
man.
thing could happen.
I it's possible. Honestly, like it's there's still more. I kind of dig into this. It's there's some concern that like he hasn't signed an extension yet. So I think there's some degree of concern around about what Ska might do to try to keep him there,
Hmm.
whether he wants to or not. And so I think that's something that obviously the Milstein camp is meant to be that, but sometimes things happen that are out of your control. Ivan Fedotov wanted to sign with the Philadelphia Flyers for the same organization, Scott St. Petersburg, and came off the ice after practice one day and was thrown into a van and was taken off to military service, just out of nowhere. So um, things happen. Things happen. He was a player that was just coming off an incredible
Yeah,
season,
but
young goaltender. Things happen sometimes. You never know. I'm just saying. I'm
I
just
agree.
saying that
But you look at
there's
Mishkov. I mean,
concern.
everybody was concerned with Mishkov having a 3-year deal in Russia, and all of a sudden, what we hear is that he's likely to bolt after the first of those 3 years. So it
Well,
can go both ways.
Michkov also didn't make their team 2 years in a row. It depends on what
Yeah.
it depends on what the organization, if they actually want the player or not, like that badly. Like and listen, I'm not saying that this is going to happen. It's just that there is an element of unknown risk in the wild card nature of how Russian organizations, and not just like some of the top Russian organizations, how they can behave when it comes to some of their top young players and whether if they want to keep them there. And there's an element of unknown there. That's all. So it's all
No,
that to say is that it's
I,
possible
yeah,
that teams won't want to take that risk. It's a possibility.
sure. But I mean, I look at the Sharks. Obviously, we know where they're going to go, but the Blackhawks are still years and years away from being a competitive team. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll apply this logic also to Mishkov last year because of that scare of being held in Russia for a few years and having basically leaving the development of said player in the hands of his Russian team. But let's say the guy still manages to develop okay, and we've had cases of guys like Kirill Kaprizov who arrived in North America just fine and ready to
Mhm.
be an impactful player. But let's say Demidov, even if he was to stay for a few more years in Russia, it's not as if the Chicago Blackhawks are waiting for him because he's the missing piece.
No.
So it's not that much different than saying, I'm going to draft an American kid who's going to college, and I know that I have to wait 2 years for him. So it's
Mm.
2 years, maybe three in Russia. Okay, fine. I've always thought that that notion when it came to Mishkov and the fact that he would be staying in Russia for many years, it was added to the mix of the arguments, the case built against him. But I never thought it was genuinely the main reason. It was an interesting add-on,
Mhm.
but I don't think that it was the main argument behind it. So for Demidov, which I know that the Canadiens like, even if he was to stay a bit in Russia, I don't think that it'd be the end of the world. The Blackhawks have a long way to go. The Ducks maybe will try to push on the accelerator a little bit. The Blue Jackets under management possibly too. Um,
I just think the
but
Blackhawks
you
and the
can expect.
Ducks. I think the Blackhawks and the Ducks will see the opportunity to add a prime defenseman from a team building standpoint. The Blackhawks already have a smallish centerpiece at forward. Adding another smallish player beside him, does that really fit when you have the opportunity to
Mhm.
add perhaps a number one defenseman, which they don't have? And there's Kevin Korchinski looks like a great prospect. I don't think many people project him to be a prototypical number one D. Some people see Levchinov in that light. They see maybe Salayev in that light further down the road. Dickinson, there's a lot of, and if you look at the kind of the class of 2025, it's not a very defense rich class. So if you're
Mhm.
building, when you say that Demidov is not the missing piece in Chicago, I agree. They have a lot of pieces they need to add, so they need to look to, 1, 2, 3 drafts down the line. Like, how are we going to get the various pieces we need to add to our team? And I think there are teams this year who see this crop of defensemen, which you don't have to be a draft expert to know that this crop of defensemen is rare. That to have this many high end defensemen be this high in the sort of the draft ranking doesn't happen all the time. And they might see a specific defenseman. They basically have the first pick in the draft. Everyone knows Celebrini's going to San Jose. They get to pick the best player, the best non-Celebrini player in the draft, and they get their pick of the defenseman. And so if they see one that they think could be a number one defenseman with them, I think that would be a very tempting thing for them to do. Anaheim, I see kind
Mhm.
of in the same light. The wild card now is Don Waddell in Columbus. I'm not quite sure what he's going to do. That you look at the Columbus pipeline and they have a lot of everything. They got some good defense prospects. They got some good forward prospects. They've invested a top 5 pick on Fantilli, on Kent Johnson, Matejchuk and Jiricek, and they have pieces there. So they can basically take the best player available, like legitimately. And who
Yeah.
Don Waddell thinks that is, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know how he would view that, and we don't have much to go on because it's he's coming from an organization where the owner flat out said we're not going to take defensemen in the first round. So it doesn't really you can't really look at Carolina's draft history and
No.
say, oh, this is how Don Waddell thinks. Like, he didn't have a choice but to think that way for until now. So maybe he actually does like taking the
Yeah.
defenseman in the first round.
Well,
Did,
unless
did he not
Don Waddell
draft? Did
wants
he
to
not draft
really,
Zach Bogosian in Atlanta, number 3, if I'm
yeah,
not mistaken? Yeah.
he
So
did.
just
Well,
just saying.
you talk about a heavy draft, a defenseman heavy draft. 2008 is probably like the defining draft for defensemen. Uh, and I remember back then there was like a top 5 defensemen that everybody seemed to agree on. But you look in most cases, I won't count Drew Doughty obviously and
Mm,
Pietrangelo, but after
yeah.
that, you know, Eric Carlson mid first round,
Hmm.
uh, John Carlson. late first round, and then Roman Josi second round. So I would argue that 3 of the 5 best defensemen were not necessarily, they were not taken like on top of the board. So as obvious as it may look now that there are clear-cut front runners as who's going to become the best defender, there's always the door that needs to be remained open to say, that's those guys that everybody sees as second-tier guy now. There's going to be one of them that's going to be better than those guys that everybody targets as, the top ones right now. Because that's scouting's an imperfect science.
That draft.
So, yeah.
This is crazy. So that draft is going to produce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, perhaps 8,000 game defensemen. Maybe even 9, actually. They throw Jared Spurgeon in the mix, 6th round pick. There could be 9,000 game defensemen to come out of that draft. That's crazy. Wow. Sorry, that's just an aside. But because Tyler Myers is 5 games away, Luke Schenn is 4 games away, Yossi's 91 games away, TJ Brody's 92 games away. He might have trouble getting there, but Spurgeon is 133 games away. I think pretty safe to say he's going to play a couple more seasons. And so, yeah. Zach Bogosian's at 848.
No,
number 3.
That was a tremendous draft for defensemen. But back to Waddell, and that's interesting because it impacts the Canadiens pick. But he was on radio last week and mentioned that to him, as important defense is in terms of team defense, teaching team defense and having your players play better defense and stopping to leak goals the way Columbus has done is something that collectively can be done better than just finding goal scoring. And
exactly.
I've got so he's keen on finding goal scoring ability with a high draft pick. So that's why even if Chicago and Anaheim were to pass on Demidov, if he's true to his word, Demidov might end up in Columbus. So that's why you look at those 3 teams. Things would really need to fall in place for Demidov to still be available at 5. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it seems a bit unlikely to me. It'd be a nice surprise. Let's put it this way.
I'd put it at, yeah. It's probably somewhat unlikely, but I think that there's a lot of, we'll see what teams think of Lindstrom. Honestly, like it's you want a more projectable NHL style power forward. The skill package there is so tantalizing. I don't know. So we'll see. We'll have to see. I wouldn't be that bad. I wouldn't fall off my chair if Ivan Demidov was there at number 5.
Okay. So the combine now, the draft afterwards. And let's preview quickly because we'll have time to go back on this and delve much more in depth into that. But how involved do you think Montreal is going to be in free agency this year? We both get the sense that their big play is going to be next summer. But still, all right, can they find a significant piece this summer?
I don't think they're looking for a significant piece this summer. I think we mentioned it in a previous podcast, but my opinion, my belief is that this summer is going to be housekeeping. We talked about the Slav extension, which even previously in this episode. I mean, I think a lot of the internal things that they need to take care of with their core young players, Suzuki and Cole are taken care of. Getting Slav into that mix salary-wise, I think is a big important part for the Canadiens. And getting some of their young D taken care of is an important piece for the game, just particularly Houle. So I don't think, to me, the issue, and this is why I started thinking about agents, Bill Zito in particular, being in the Stanley Cup final, is to me, I think Kent Hughes is kind of looking at it like, Doc's contract's going to be up soon. Now, they don't know if Doc's going to merit a huge raise at the end of that contract, but they almost have to operate under the assumption he will. Like they have to operate under the they have to allow for that to happen. They love Doc's upside. They just haven't been able to see it for any consistent stretch of time. If he hits that upside over the next 2 seasons, what's his next contract going to look like? So then I think they kind of look at it like how much term and how much money can we commit that won't prevent us from signing Doc to the contract that he's eventually going to earn. And they even have to take this pick in this draft into consideration. If this pick hits, let's say they don't come next year, let's say they come the year after, they do their entry level, and at the end of that entry level, they need a big contract. How much term can we offer? And so I think they're going to look at this particular free agent market and be like, let's just take care of our own stuff. And I could be proven wrong, obviously, but this is just my opinion of what they might do. Let's just take care of our own business so that we're better prepared when, certain contracts come off the books next summer and the cap goes up again. We're better prepared to hit it next summer or even the summer after, because we'll be adding more around the edges because our core will be locked up to some extent. So, I mean, you take Dvorak off the books, Army off the books, perhaps Jake Evans, who knows what happens to him. And there's money coming off.
Savard.
Savard, even Harris will be RFA after next season. It's so, when Ken Hughes said, yes, this will be the biggest summer since we got here, but I suspect next summer will be even bigger. I think that's what he means, is that this summer is going to be more based on housekeeping. Then that's not to say the Canadiens are going to be active on the trade market, I'm convinced. But in terms of strictly unrestricted free agency, I can't see them being really big players in unrestricted free agency because I feel that they have other steps that they need to take before they can get there.
Yeah, I was looking at the list that our buddy Chris Johnston has elaborated on as published on The Athletic about the top 50 UFAs. And there are plenty of interesting players there.
Sure.
But how many of them are fits for Montreal? It's not a ton. That's
and how many of them can you bring in on relatively low term? I think that's a factor.
Well, and I mean, if it's a longer term, the guy needs to be younger, much younger. So he's got to be 27, 28 at the most, because very quickly, every year after 30, really has an impact on the production, and you're paying for, usually when you're ready to spend on the free agent markets because you want that guy to help your team win in a rather short term. Canadiens are not there.
No.
But that doesn't mean that a free agent would not be able to help them be better. And I think I look at these playoffs this year, and I don't remember seeing playoffs where the special teams were so important because usually it's the 5-on-5 game, the third lines, the depth that really keep coming out at the forefront. But the special teams have been huge this spring, and I look at the Canadiens' penalty kill, and it may not sound very sexy, but it's a penalty kill that's been struggling. It's a penalty kill that has Jake Evans as, the most used forwards on the PK throughout the league.
In the league,
but he's entering the last year of his contract. In the league.
Yeah.
He's entering the last year of his contract. Arguably the most efficient forward on the PK is Yoel Armia, last year of his contract. Then you got, after that, plenty of question marks. You got guys that you would rather not have playing PK, like Suzuki, for example. Dvorak is good on the PK, wins faceoffs and whatnot, last year of his contract too. And you got guys like I think of, let's say, Michael Pizzetta. I think that your bottom six guys have to play a role on either one of your special teams. If they're bottom six guys, they're more likely to play on the PK than on the power play. But you need your guys to fill roles, and when you have a guy like Pezzetta who has not been able to carve himself a role on the PK like regularly, I think I see a window there to find a guy who's going to step in, can be a difference maker in that part of the game, that can help in other departments too, in terms of toughness too, in terms of experience. If that guy is able to play both center and wing, I think that's a plus. Also, I think there are guys. These guys that the category I have in my head is not. They're not stars, but they're guys that, and it's also a category where guys that have been very, very effective in that role for many years. You might be overpaying for them because you're going to be paying for the effectiveness they had before, and there's a risk that you're going to pay for them now that they're past their prime. So you got to be vigilant there to not overpay for that sort of player. But there's a type of supporting cast. We see right now in Edmonton, Sam Carrick, who was a trade deadline acquisition. To me, that's a guy that fits that profile. And there are others. I mean, you saw in the play again at the trade deadline, Colorado. They went after Brendan Duhem. They went after Yakov Trenin.
Both UFA.
Both harder guys. Was that?
Both UFA and both penalty killers.
Yeah. Yes.
It is hard to find like the bottom of the lineup guys who also kill penalties. I mean, basically you got those two. You got Teddy Bluger in terms of guys who might not cost even Bluger is coming off a $1.9 million a year contract. Trenin's at 1.7. I mean, Duhay maybe. They're all kind of rugged guys. There's also like just guys that if you just want to straight up replace Pezzetta, like Carrick to me falls under that category. He's not really a penalty kill guy. Ryan Lomberg, who will probably stay in Florida, but he's that type of guy. Two guys that I find interesting that are kind of low key, under the radar kind of names. Liam O'Brien of the Utah NHL franchise is a UFA. I think an effective fourth line player. I think Andre Tourigny has a lot of time for him. He doesn't have a huge role. He doesn't kill penalties, but he's a physical fourth line type player. The other one's Kiefer Sherwood, who has kind of bounced around a fair bit. Had a really good season with Nashville.
Yes,
I more or less put much stock into the hits stat, but was third on the team in hits, playing 12 minutes a game. More than Trenin in 8 more games, had 60 more hits. So also not a penalty kill guy, but a guy who's playing league minimum, who's making league minimum rather, would probably take any contract with any term, which again the Canadiens are not going to be thrilled to hand out, but still unrestricted free agent, and really had a strong year in Nashville for the first time in his career. He's basically he's 10 goals, 27 points in 68 games. He's never played 68 games in the NHL before. He's definitely never scored 10 goals before, although he came close a year prior. I don't know. He's a guy that strikes me as a possible low-key ad. He's 29, just turned 29 at the end of March. So I don't know. Could be a fit there because he would add some of the physicality, even though he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's 6 foot, close to 200, but throws his body around. Yeah. And Ken Hughes mentioning he wants to add some of that might make him a potential attractive guy on July 1st.
We do a mailbag every Monday, Let's go to the mailbag. Mailbag. They reach out and they write to us.
So, mailbag time. But before we get to the mailbag, I wanted to mention something. So we just heard the Monday mailbag jingle, or kind of trippy sort of introduction. That, of course, was done by Greg McPherson, as was our opening jingle, and the old Future Friday jingle that is on hiatus. And so we got a note in the mailbag from Greg. He's part of the Greg McPherson band. He's going to be playing in Montreal on Wednesday evening. So for all our listeners who are in Montreal, on Wednesday evening, Marc-Antoine and I unfortunately can't go. He was inviting us to the show. We would have loved to have gone, but we will, as we mentioned.
We'll be in Buffalo.
We will be in Buffalo. So for all of you who would like to go, please do. He and his drummer make up the Greg McPherson band. Will be playing at a place called Hémisphère Gauche. That's at 221 Beaubien East. There will be another band playing, Second Body. But if you all want a nice evening of music, you can check that out on Wednesday evening. And please go and support Greg McPherson, who has been a great friend to the show and a great supporter and provided us with all our musical needs. So thank you, Greg, again. And we wish we could have been at the show, but we're going to have to miss it. But hopefully some of our listeners show up and listen to you play. We would have loved to have been there. So good luck with that.
Yeah, that's close to Saint Laurent and the Little Italy, that part of town. That's
that part. Yeah,
good. All right. Yeah, I wish I had gone. That's too bad that we're in Buffalo.
Yeah, it is.
Oh well.
Unfortunate.
Okay, at least the message is sent. The invitation is sent. Yes.
Yes. So let's start. Let's start. Try the veal. Yes, exactly. We'll be here all week. So let's start. We're going to start with two questions we got on X that are very similar. One was from Ryan Lee. And this comes off, obviously, the Saginaw Spirit winning the Memorial Cup last night. Owen Beck scoring 2 goals in the Cup final, being named MVP. Obviously, a real high point for him as he ends his junior career and turns pro next year. So Ryan Lee asks, is it possible that management views Owen Beck as a 2C rather than a 3C? And 36 Reinbacher, is that the handle?
Yeah.
Owen Beck had an amazing run and scored 2 in the Memorial Cup final, ultimately winning. How do we rate this for a 20-year-old? What can we expect from him next year, taking Dvorak's or Evans' spot at center?
Okay, well, I think that all of a sudden, a great game where he was named MVP of the Memorial Cup. It goes a long way, but not that long away.
Yes.
First of all, he was playing his 19-year-old season. He turned 20 during the season, but he was technically playing his 19-year-old season because
he played at the World Juniors.
That's it. He was not eligible to play anywhere else than there or in the AHL. So I don't think that in the NHL, yes. Yeah. So I think that it's great from a Canadiens perspective to see their prospect and his junior stage on such a high note, finish with a bang. That's exactly what you want to see. I think that the main benefit that the Canadiens will see that is a proof that their prospect in key games will rise to the occasion. That's the main takeaway from that should be that is that Owen Beck, when it counts the most, has just proved you that he's going to be there and he can deliver. So I think that's great. I went through the list of the Stafford Smith Trophy award winners, so the Memorial Cup MVP. Man, it's quite a list. There are guys there: Corey Perry, Alexander Radulov, Milan Lucic, Taylor Hall twice, Jonathan Huberdeau, Nathan McKinnon, Leon Draisaitl, Mitchell Marner. So those are quite big names, of course.
Those are the highlights.
There are other guys. Those are the highlights. Yeah, there's goaltender Kelly Gard in there. Michael Chaput, some Latvian named Edgar Skulda. More recently, Joel Teasdale. By that time, he was already signed by the Canadiens, if I'm not mistaken. So they're not all success stories, but it's nice company to be with. As for becoming a second-line center instead of third-line center, let's not get too carried away. I think that if Owen Beck becomes more than a fourth-line center, it becomes a good third-line center, that would be awesome. Awesome. But I think that he's got the tools to be an NHL player, no doubt about it. But I think that hoping that he becomes a 2C is exaggerated in my humble opinion. I don't know about you.
Well, I think he has a legitimate potential to be a really solid 3C. yeah, 2C is probably pushing it at the NHL level. But he's going to be a role player, you know, and I think he has the potential to be a very good role player. And we were talking earlier about needing guys to kill penalties. Eventually, Owen Beck is going to probably be one of those guys who's going to kill penalties, take big faceoffs, play difficult matchups, do a lot of useful things that help teams win. The offensive upside remains in doubt, if not limited. Yes, he had a great game yesterday. Yes, he's put up points ever since he got to Saginaw. But it's not clear how well the offensive part of his game is going to translate. Listen, he has a very good shot. But first and foremost, anyone who expects Owen Beck to play in Montreal next year, I think, are going to be disappointed. I think he is, in all likelihood, barring some sort of gangbusters fantastic training camp, in all likelihood, he's going to be playing in Laval. And so, and it'll be good for him to play in Laval. Honestly, like he is, you know, I think last week we were talking about, you know, certain types of players maybe don't fit in the AHL and probably won't benefit from playing there. We were talking about Lane Hudson in that way. Owen Beck is the type of guy who would benefit from playing in the AHL, and maybe not as long as like someone like Jake Evans had to, but one, if not 2 seasons in Laval would probably benefit him. You know, but I think there's legitimate 3C potential in him, and him being not just a decent third line center. I think he has the potential to be a very good third line center. So that's where I put him.
Well, it depends on his offensive upside, though, because he can be a very responsible centerman, play on the PK, wins his faceoffs, and you know, and work his ass off. But if his offensive potential is limited, you know, if you want to be on a winning team, the third line centerman on a winning team still provides offense.
Yeah, well, I think he could be a 15 to 20 goal scorer in the NHL. I don't think that's unreasonable to think that he could do that. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. I mean, that's my opinion. And so if he can do that, then that's fine for a third line center. I think that's good. Yeah. And so, but yeah, he's not going to be. I don't see him having much of a top 6 upside. I don't think the Canadiens ever saw that in him, but what they did see in him from the get-go is that he is the type of player that helps you win games. And I think they still see him in that light, but not in a primary offensive role.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that question. All right. Now, here's one from Noel Landry from Melbourne, Australia. So good day, mate. It's nice to hear from someone from Australia. Well, personally, I'm used to, because I hear one every day. But for our listeners, it's good.
Just to be clear, Marc Antoine's wife is from Australia, which is why he made that. A lot of you might not know that, so that's why he said that.
Yeah,
yeah. So he's allowed to make the good day mate. He's allowed to make the good day mate joke because he's been to Australia several times, and he's been given a pass to make that you know to re-mention that trope.
That's right. So Noel says, you have mentioned that the current management regime is putting more focus on player development with the addition of coaches like Adam Nicholas, Dr. Schott, although he was more a guest than added
consultant,
to the coaching staff.
Consultant.
That's a good way to say it. Paul Byron and others. The Habs have also set themselves up with a good local training facility, and the Laval Rocket farm team handy and local as well. This all costs money, and while there's a salary cap for players other than commercial common sense, nothing limits the size of your specialist coaching or scouting or facilities or data and analytics or training staff. My question is, looking at other perennially successful franchises around the NHL or even in other sports, what do you think they do well off the ice, off the court, or off the field that the Habs might consider adding to the mix to get a further edge for their players and their franchise? So thanks for that question, Noel. You're right. There's no cap for that. And I think that's something where the Canadiens can really take an advantage to spend more than others. But frankly, I think that they already do that. they could always do more. But when you look, you mentioned facilities, but little things like what they call the player services, the quality of the
Mhm.
food that's served to them, how comfortable the plane is, little things that spread the rumor around the league that, hey, if you go to Montreal, you're going to be well treated. That's something that plays in favor of a team like Montreal that's got wealthy means.
Mhm.
It might balance for higher taxes a little bit for crappy weather in the winter, but if you treat your players well and you use that money for that, it's a little bonus.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, Arpin. I think that there's always little improvements that can be done or investments that can be made into performance, into sports science, let's say, not just for conditioning, but trying just to have scientific minds that are asked to contribute to see if there are things regarding the equipment that could be improved. We a few years ago in Vancouver, former GM Mike Gillis had done a big study on sleep science to try to find solutions to the fact that the Canucks were traveling a lot more than almost every other team in the NHL, and it affected his players. So he was looking to find solutions there. So I think that every little edge that you can find is good. And I think
Mhm.
that on the science side, and I use that term very broadly, it's something that the Canadiens could always do better. But I think that they already invest quite a bit of money, and probably more than the vast majority of teams, in those little things that are outside the salary envelope itself.
Yeah, I mean, just from a player development standpoint and a hockey development standpoint, they have a pretty vast staff, compared to most teams. I think they could beef up their analytics department personally. They have Chris Boucher, they have Philippe Desaulniers, they have Miranda McMillan. It's a three-person department. They do excellent work, but it is a labor-intensive job, and to really mine all the data that's out there, especially with the puck and player tracking technology that's come in of late. I do think that that's an area where they could probably boost it a fair bit. So that is one thing that I would do. That is, we see in football, both American football and global football or soccer. Um, a lot of the gains and a lot of the competitive edges are being found there, depending on how innovative and how modern your approach to it is, and your acceptance of new ideas and what have you. Um, I think that's somewhere that they could probably stand to add some more human resources. And who knows, maybe they might consider doing that, but I think that that's something that they could do. They don't necessarily have to build a team the way the Maple Leafs did under Dubas. I think they had 8 people in their analytics department at one point,
Yeah,
something
that was
like that. It
huge.
was a very robust group of people. They don't have to go that far, but I think adding in that department could never hurt. But it's still. And the other thing I just want to mention is that yes, the Canadiens are swimming in money and they make a lot of money. Uh, they don't have like a limitless well of resources to spend. I think there's a bit of a misnomer that yes, they're one of the most valuable franchises in the NHL, and yes, I'm not saying that the Canadiens are poor, but they do. I think their margins are a little bit thinner than people assume, uh, and there are budgetary constraints that are placed on certain departments. For instance, the Laval Rocket operates under a budget. They're not just going to spend as much money as they want in adding those veterans we mentioned off the top of the show. There are budgetary concerns. It's a big reason Alex Belzil is no longer in the organization. Is what he was going to command as a free agent was not allowed for under the Rockets budget. So they, like any good business, they have budgets. They have financial restraints to some extent. And if you look at, the front office since Jeff Gordon and Ken Hughes came on, it's relatively lean. There's not a lot there's 6 people listed in the front office. Jeff Gordon, Ken Hughes, John Sedgwick, and Martin Lapointe, Nick Bobrov, and Vincent Lecavalier, who is not even a full-time employee. So they run a relatively lean operation, for a team that has the resources that they do. But one place where they've been pretty good at adding is player development / hockey development. Like Adam Nicholas's department and Rob Ramage's department has grown since Jeff Gordon and Ken Hughes came in.
Yeah. You're right. There was Adam
Nicholas's department was invented.
For the first year and a half after Ken Hughes hiring, there was a lot of discussions about adding an assistant general manager, and that never
happened.
That other hire never happened. So you're right. It's a lean operation.
There's also a lot of talk of diversifying the hockey operations of the team, and that hasn't happened either. Other than Marie-Philippe Poulin coming on, it hasn't really happened.
Well,
and Miranda McMillan, I should say.
She has not really come. I mean, all in all, we've seen Dr. Schott more often than Marie-Philippe Poulin. So. Yeah,
well, I think she's had other things on the go, so I think it's justifiable. But she is involved during the season. She does. We might not see her that often, but she is involved. I think she goes and watches some of the prospects when she can. And obviously, Miranda McMillan that we mentioned earlier was another woman who was added to the staff. But yeah, it's not a very colorful bunch. But anyhow, it's not as diverse as I think Jeff Molson kind of made it sound like it would be. But they still have time. Okay, well, thanks for the question, Noel. Thanks for listening in Australia. Spread the word. Tell your friends. Next question comes from Joël Gabay on email, who asks, hey guys, very matter-of-factly, Matheson for Necas seems to make a lot of sense. Canes get a young veteran that can play power play when Burns is gone. Matheson is cost-friendly. It solves the Habs left-hand D problem and opens up the spot on the power play for Hudson. Habs get a 25-year-old top 6 winger with size and unlocked potential. What say you to that? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I know I'm a bit more open, I think, than you are on the idea of trading Mike Matheson.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you were to trade Mike Matheson, you would have to replace him with another veteran on the blue line, but that veteran would not necessarily have to play like such an important role as Mike Matheson. I think the whole point is: do the Canadiens, leave the door open to just making sure that Houle plays on the left side and plays a ton of minutes? It's also suggesting that if you trade Matheson, you give the responsibility of generating offense from the blue line to kids that have not done that yet. And I don't know many organizations throughout hockey who will say, well, now that we have that guy who's about to arrive, let's make room for him by trading this other guy. That's not how teams think, really. So if you choose to trade Mike Matheson, you need to know that you have an in-house solution that today can give you what Mike Matheson has given you so far. If you don't have it, then you wait. As for the trade itself, I think that it's a fair idea, a fair trade. But I've seen Necas' name bounced around. He was sent like through half of the teams in the NHL since the Hurricanes were eliminated. Yeah. So clearly there's going to be a lot of interest for him. And I think that part of your reservation, Arpin, is that Mike Matheson might not be enough, right?
It's possible that it's not enough, that they would have to add to that. I agree that Matheson's contract makes him and obviously his production makes him a very attractive type of piece. But but yeah, you look at Vancouver, who, the whole Pedersen dance that they did with Carolina, Necas was involved in those conversations for multiple reports. Boston is in the market for a guy like Necas can play center. They would be in the market for a top six center. They have Linus Ullmark that they could dangle to a team that just saw its goaltending fall apart in the playoffs again. That would be an attractive piece at a $5 million cap hit, although I believe he's going into his last season. The other part to me, and listen, I mean, yes, I'm opposed to the idea of trading Matheson because I don't think it's fair to Lane Hudson to be like, hey, we're going to clear the decks for you. You're going to come in and be our top offensive defenseman. You've played 2 games in the NHL. You're going to run our power play and you're going to produce like crazy from the blue line. Here you go. That's not fair.
Yeah.
And that's probably not putting him in the best position to succeed. Having some insulation there would make more sense. And frankly, we don't know yet if Lane Hudson can do what he does at the NHL level on a consistent basis, playing 82 games a year and going into playoffs and what have you. My other thing about Necas in general, everything we said about the Canadiens and free agency apply to Necas too, in a sense. Yes, he's 25, but he's looking for a long-term contract at a pretty big dollar figure. And so all the window management and all the things that we were talking about earlier, where the Canadiens need to kind of carefully, somewhat meticulously plan how they're going to spend their money, they would have to make a commitment to Necas that that wouldn't really fit in that plan necessarily. They would instantly make him a core piece, basically, with this contract.
Yeah,
he's gonna command of long term.
But if they think that he deserves it, if they think that he's deserving to be paid like that, north of $7 million a year.
Yeah, that's all. That's all I'm saying. Sure, if they're convinced, I don't see how they can be convinced. I mean, I think he's a good player. I think he's worth that money, but he's never had a 30-goal season. He had 71 points last year. Took a dip this year. Had a pretty good playoffs, I thought. Not the most consistent, but still not bad. It's hard to be, and you don't have to be 100% sure on players, but you need to feel likely about a player. And so this seems like a guy that would fit, but he would be, I think that the contract part of it is something that people aren't necessarily taking into account that I think they should. I think it's it'll be a strong consideration for Montreal. A, the acquisition cost, and B, what it does to their finances once he's actually on board and signing. But the acquisition cost to me is going to, for Carolina, is going to benefit from a lot of competition because players like this don't generally become available via trade. The one advantage the Canadiens have, and Matheson is part of that group, is that while, yes, Carolina needs goaltending, they also need help on defense. They have a lot of unrestricted free agents on defense. Brent Burns is getting older, as Joel mentioned in his question. Canadiens have a lot of young, cheap defensemen that they could want. And so if you do have to add to Matheson, you could throw in a Struble or someone, maybe you'd even take a Mailloux. I don't know, but you could throw in another defenseman to make it, to compete with the other offers. Like we know that when the Canadiens went after Kirby Dach, there was competition. And, if you remember, we found out that actually one of the competing teams actually had a better draft pick to offer. So the Canadiens had to throw in, I believe it was a 3rd round pick, to get that deal over the top. I think in this situation, if Carolina is looking at a situation where you can get a cost-controlled Mike Matheson or a not cost-controlled Philip Roenick, who kind of represents sort of the same financial problems as Necas does to some extent, as an RFA himself. But maybe you see more upside in Roenick. He's had a longer period of pretty decent production than Matheson has. Matheson's really kind of just exploded in the last 2 seasons. Maybe they say we want more, even though, again, I agree with you that Matheson's contract makes him a very attractive piece. But if if they feel that Necas is worth it and worth the contract, then they should have no hesitation in adding a young defenseman or draft picks or whatever it takes to get it over the line. I just
Yeah.
think that I just think that contract might be problematic for them.
Okay. Well, to me, the Necas being 25, I think that it fits right in with the age group. And even if you sign him for 7-8 years and it takes him from 25 to 32 or 25 to 33, that's fine. The only thing is you got to feel as though the makeup of this player and who he is, how he plays, fits with what you want to do, and hence you're going to be willing to give him that much money. So I don't think that if the Canadiens want to get better, they're going to have to spend at some point. They're going to have to invest money in their group of forwards. But I mean, the Joel's points are very valid. The fact that he's got size and an unlocked potential. I kind of wonder why the guy would want to leave a team that's on the cusp, just so that he can have
Play
a
on the
better
power
spot
play.
on the team.
Yeah.
But
I think it's a legitimate. I think it's a legitimate question. It's a legitimate question. Why would you want to leave that organization right now?
Yeah, that's it. So to me, there's
a little.
So it's not exactly team first mentality. So anyway, if you're interested in that player, you have to investigate that part. Maybe you're going to be reassured. Maybe he's there. He's got the right reasons to do so. But it seems as though, and it's not new. We've been hearing rumblings about that for months. That probably that next year he would play somewhere else. So it's been brewing for some time. So, and he's been playing for a great team, and it's usually if the team wins, the guy will say, no matter if I play first power play, second power play, first line, second line, if my team wins, I'm a happy guy. That's the general. That's what you want. That's what you want, and that's the optics that you want. Yeah. So anyway, I would look that up before going any further on the Necas front.
Especially before giving him a 7-year deal worth $50 million. I mean, that's
there
just.
You go.
Let's do one more because we're getting it's getting kind of late. So sorry, there were a bunch here that I'm going to kind of skip over, but it's I thought we'd do the one from Dan Moldaver on X. Does this management value creating a next wave of prospects through the draft so there's a steady influx of cheap talent, or spending picks and trades to become competitive sooner? I worry the rebuild will stall out at okay due to insufficient high-end talent and no next wave.
Yeah, well, it depends what you mean by next wave here, but I think that it's always a byproduct of how many picks you have. You're going to create depth in your pipeline if you have a lot of picks and you draft well, but it's just that at some point when you have too many picks, then you can bundle quantity to turn this into quality. And if you turn this into quality and you have higher picks, then you can get that high-end talent or get closer to that. But I don't think that the Canadiens, the next wave, at least on defense, that's all they have. They have that. It's just a huge wave that they've got. But the high end, it's no matter what's your strategy or what you believe in and how you're going to proceed organizationally, high end talent is always going to be hard to find.
Yeah, and I think the question's valid because we have seen them trading draft picks 2 years in a row. I have very little doubt we're going to see it again. As we mentioned earlier, next year's draft picks might be in play. There's a certain time to hit the accelerator. I think the Canadiens' results the last 2 years, last 3 years, really give no indication that that time is now. But the timing of that is really of vital importance. And this whole notion of building through the draft, yes, you do have to some extent have to build through the draft. But I mean, I look at again the Panthers right now. They have basically 3 players that they've drafted who are having an impact in these playoffs. Aaron Ekblad, number 1 overall. Alexander Barkov, number 2 overall. And Anton Lundell, who was 11th overall, if I'm not mistaken.
Or
9th?
13.
Somewhere around there. Anyhow.
No. Yeah.
I will look that up right now. Yeah. But anyhow, they are not built through the draft. They are built through shrewd signings, an extremely shrewd waiver claim, and trades. Yeah, and so it's really Matthew Tkachuk, trade. Sam Bennett, trade. Carter Verhaeghe, shrewd free agent signing. Evan Rodriguez, good signing. Luster-Reinen, trade. Nick Cousins signed. Lomberg signed. Forsling is that waivers claim I was referring to. Mikula was a good free agent signing, surprisingly. OEL signed. Brandon Montour trade. Like it's really, if you have, and the point being that, so their core defenseman was drafted, and 2 of their, and their core forward was drafted. And then after that, they went about building their team with the type of players that fit the style that they wanted to play. And I think that's kind of the approach the Canadiens are somewhat listen, they have a massive prospect pool already. They have the deepest prospect pool in the NHL, and I don't think anyone argues otherwise. Anyone who objectively looks at every prospect pool in the NHL would say that Montreal has the deepest one. Yes, they lack that high-end talent, but trading the 26th pick in the draft, if you have a better chance of grabbing a higher end talent through that trade than you do by actually drafting that player at that spot, I don't see why they wouldn't do that, especially considering all the prospects they already have.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. No, I agree there. Lindell
but the
was
next wave,
12th, by the way.
12th, yes. Thank you. So we were both off by 1. And so as far as the next wave is concerned, at some point the Canadiens hope to be not drafting in the lottery. They hope to be a playoff team. And I think at that point, what they have to be careful with is when they decide to go all Julien Brisebois and say, these draft picks don't mean anything, I'm just going to trade them all and try and keep the window open as long as I can. Well, first of all, the Canadiens have to open that window, but not to harp on it, but if you look at the stars, that's the way to do it. Yes, you have those later picks. You hit on them more often than you don't. You can have that next wave, but it takes really good drafting, and we'll see if the Canadiens are able to do that. But I think in order to open that window, the influx of talent needs to happen, and it's not only going to happen via the draft. And using those draft picks as trade assets is a way to bring that talent in. And I think they're still in that mode that they need to add more talent.
But when Dan says, I worry the rebuild will stall out at okay, there's a chance.
Yes. Oh, of course, there's a chance.
Not every
100%.
So we're going through this thing that's for years. It's a very long process, and there's no guarantee that there's going to be a cup at the end of that. It could be a team that keeps just knocking at the door, that might have a conference final here and there. Maybe it'll be better. That's what we all wish, because it's, as reporters, it's more fun to cover a team that goes into the playoffs than at the Combine in Buffalo. But but anyway, I think that there's still a risk that it doesn't pan out exactly the way they want. It's just too early to tell. But I understand the concern, Dan. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I understand the concern too. It's just that the source of the concern being that the lack of high-end talent. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but due to insufficient high-end talent. So the Canadiens aren't trading away. I mean, listen, barring something unforeseen, I don't think they're trading away the number 5 pick here. They haven't traded away their high picks. They've traded away later picks where, yes, you can maybe find high-end talent there. And as I mentioned, once they become a good team, they're going to have to live on finding high-end talent in that range in the draft. But right now, using those kinds of picks as trade ammunition, I feel is a smarter way to get that high end talent.
Yeah.
You're more likely to find that high end talent on the trade market using those picks than you are in the draft using those picks. And then once they open that window and once they become a team that's competitive, that one like the one you just described that makes it to conference finals, and in order to maintain that or even push it further, you got to draft like the Stars.
Yeah,
because
and you have to make shrewd moves like the Panthers. So it
like the Panthers, yeah, that's it, exactly. So it's but that's the Canadiens aren't, in all likelihood, are not going to have their McDavid or their Matthews or their McKinnon. They're not going to have these transcendent top 5 players in the league type of guys to build their team around. It's unlikely.
No,
and so they're going to have to go about it a different way, and remains to be seen if there is a way to go about it a different way. Historically, those high-end talents are the ones raising cups at the end of the year. But as we mentioned earlier, I think this management group sees its own path to getting there. Whether they can execute it or not remains to be seen, but I think that they see a path with the talent they have on hand and with the talent they see coming in, that they can create their own archetype of a team that can win. We'll see. But it's 100% possible that they can't.
But you say, no, they're not going to have their McDavids or whatnot, but let's not forget that this team drafted first overall 2 years ago, and now for the second year in a row, they will draft fifth. So 1, 5, and 5, those are high draft picks. So that's usually when you rebuild, you cannot really hope for more than that. After that, it's just you factor in the depth of each crop of prospects. There are drafts that are stronger than others. But I mean, in terms of rebuilding and hoping for high draft picks, it's not as though the Canadiens drafted 15. They've been having those high draft picks.
But none of the players they've drafted.
Well,
yeah, maybe the number 5 this year turns into that player, and even Slav, honestly, like I don't want to put a ceiling on Slav. I don't want to limit him in any way, but I don't see him being that player. But you know what? Yeah, I watch Matthew Tkachuk. Slav could become a Matthew Tkachuk. I could see that. His own version of a Matthew Tkachuk. Like I don't think that's unreasonable to think that he could be that quality of a player, Maybe not with the same snarl. He needs a mouth guard, yeah. But he has the same kind of FU attitude as Matthew Tkachuk has. And he has the body, he has the skills. I could see him becoming that type of player eventually. Which really that's the premium, him and Barkov. Are sort of the 2 guys who drive the bus in Florida, along with Reinhart. So they don't have a McKinnon or a McDavid or a Matthews. Is my point. Like they don't have that either, and they've built a hell of a team. So,
all right, I guess that's it for today. We had another healthy episode, so we're going to make prepare our luggage for Buffalo. We're going to talk to you next Monday, and we'll give you all the little gossips, the little nuggets that we gathered during that week. In the meantime, enjoy the weather, enjoy your week, and Arpin, I'll see you tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow in that lobby, that hotel lobby that doesn't exist.